What does the average American or European know about Somalia? Somali pirates and Ridley Scott's movie Black Hawk Down often come to mind. However, the life and history of this country are multifaceted, fascinating, and at the same time, deeply tragic and sorrowful. Iron, copper, oil, uranium, and a strategic geographic location. Somalia seems to have everything for prosperity, and its people for well-being. Yet in reality, life in Somalia can be compared to hell. A collapsed economy, lawlessness, hunger, poverty, violence, and death, with microscopic pockets of stability. Western attempts to help stabilize the country only pushed Somalis into the arms of militants. The government made no effort to resolve the conflict. On the contrary, it did everything to maintain it, lining its pockets with money from Western nations. 1. Pirates in worn-out rubber sandals. The story of Somali pirates is yet another example of global manipulation of public opinion by people sitting in quiet, richly furnished offices thousands of miles away from this unfortunate, sun-scorched, and cursed land once called Somalia. By 2010, the whole world was talking about the pirates, but the scale of their operations was exaggerated by international propaganda. U.S. forces and NATO used the pirates as an excuse to gain access to the Indian Ocean through Somali territory. In reality, these so-called pirates were just ordinary fishermen. At some point, they could no longer fish due to toxic waste dumped by foreign ships, so they began targeting those who disrupted their livelihoods. People who were held hostage by them described their experiences like this. On board, the treatment was relatively humane. They were fed and not beaten. Mostly, the pirates would simply keep people until they received ransom. The pirates themselves do not resemble fearsome marauders. Thin, prematurely aged by hard work and deprivation, they are unpretentious and deeply religious. Interestingly, they still exist today, around 1,500 individuals. For them, piracy is like a lottery. Let's catch a foreigner and see how much we can get for them. In Somalia, authorities catch, prosecute, and imprison them. Essentially, they are just troublemakers who do not follow laws, including Islamic ones. They are akin to mafiosi robbing banks. 2. A country with little hope for the future trying to normalize the situation in Somalia is like washing a pig. You clean it, and it goes right back to wallow in even filthier mud, remarked a Ugandan colonel in an interview with Foreign Policy. In the same interview, he compared the situation in Somalia to what happened in Afghanistan. As soon as the coalition left Afghanistan, Taliban militants quickly took over everything. The same thing is happening in Somalia. At present, Somalia practically does not exist as a unified state. After the dictatorial regime of Siad Barre collapsed, the country fragmented into numerous self-governing enclaves, leading to the emergence of quasi-states like Puntland, Somaliland, Azania, and others. The nation plunged into the abyss of civil war. Inter-clan conflicts intensified, and a brutal military conflict escalated, claiming dozens or even hundreds of lives daily. Each of these provinces has its own laws. Almost all have their own currency, passports, and president. The internal situation in the country boils down to this. Some people want to live in a Western-style state, while others want a return to Islamic law. This is why the struggle continues. Some places are relatively safe. Not long ago, the most turbulent areas in Somalia were the capital, Mogadishu, and a few nearby cities. The factions fighting there call each other terrorists, but in reality, they are battling for power and financial control. Yes, some want the country to live under Sharia law, but this is also an international struggle. On one side are the radical groups, and on the other, the West. Speaking of Al-Shabaab, which until recently controlled the southern part of the country, the Islamists claim to be fighting for the country's freedom as well, aiming to establish their own order. 3. Clan wars, capital punishment, and friendship with the Soviets. The people of Somalia can be broadly divided into two categories. Nomads who raise livestock, sheep, camels, goats, cattle, and farmers who primarily inhabit the southern regions of the country. After the war that led to the collapse of the state, people gradually began returning to peaceful activities such as trade and other enterprises. The nature of these activities depends on the specific city, its level of development and location. Somalia, being a port nation, plays a vital role for many landlocked African countries that rely on it for export and import. Despite this, unemployment across the country remains extremely high. The traditional way of life is deeply rooted in Islamic customs, similar to those observed by Muslims in Russia's Caucasus region. A distinct feature of Somali traditions is its clan-based system. If someone in a clan needs support, for example, due to illness or a house fire, members of the clan are obligated to help, pooling money or resources for aid. A clan serves as a kind of insurance for life's challenges. However, some clans harbor hatred for one another, as the country is still dealing with the aftermath of the war. When Somalia was a united nation, the president at the time targeted certain clans at the start of the war, fearing they might seize power. This sparked a civil war among clans in both the north and the south. The north managed to resolve its conflicts faster, but in the south, peace remains elusive. Medieval-like laws prevail. For instance, if a father disapproves of a marriage, his daughter cannot marry someone from another clan. Capital punishment exists across all the fragmented states of what was once Somalia, including the current Somali state. Examples of crimes punishable by death include murder and treason. If someone decides to convert to Christianity, they are given a month to reconsider. If they still wish to become a Christian after this period, the death penalty is also applied. 4. Why it all happened. The roots of Somalia's collapse lie in the territorial divisions inherited from its colonial past. During the colonial era, the country was divided into Italian, British, and French territories. The colonial powers drew borders between their holdings with no regard for the historical settlement patterns of Africans themselves. This sowed the seeds of clan power struggles. Nomads fiercely competed over water, grazing land, and livestock. Deep-seated conflicts among them were exacerbated by the rivalry between moderate and radical Islamists, as well as constant interference from neighboring countries, particularly Ethiopia and Eritrea. In 1960, Somalia gained independence. It was then that two former colonies, Italian Somalia and British Somaliland, formally united. For the first decade, Somalia was relatively stable and prosperous. Like Ethiopia, Somalia became an area of interest for the Soviet Union. With Moscow's support, military academies were established, and a unified army, known as the Lions of Africa, was formed. Somalia received economic and technical assistance, along with uniforms and tanks, while the Soviet Navy secured a base in Berbera. Somalia's territorial ambitions gradually grew, and it began making claims against neighboring states such as Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti. Everything changed in 1977 when Somalia decided to attack another Soviet ally in the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia. Moscow had to choose a side in the conflict, and Ethiopia's government seemed more reliable and stable. As a result, with Soviet weapons and active Cuban military support, the Ethiopian army crushed Somali forces. This marked the beginning of Somalia's descent into chaos. Changes that initially seemed reversible to the Somali government eventually spiraled out of control. When President Mohammed Siad Barre attempted to stabilize the situation, it was already too late. 5. How to visit Somalia and necessary precautions. Somalia now has a semblance of a functioning government, and obtaining a visa is possible. However, it remains difficult to enter the country, and tourists are required to hire security. Without it, it is virtually impossible for foreigners to travel there. For a European to walk the streets of Mogadishu alone is tantamount to a death sentence. While one might be able to stroll around for a short time, it wouldn't last long. Most sources indicate that a visa must be obtained in advance by applying to a consulate. However, this is not entirely accurate. A visa can be issued upon arrival at the airport, provided the traveler has obtained prior approval from the migration department. You must provide documentation indicating a local host who will vouch for you and guarantee your safety during your stay. Typically, This is offered by companies specializing in security and armed escorts. Understandably, only those with dozens or even hundreds of armed fighters can realistically ensure safety in a country as precarious as Somalia. The challenges of obtaining the necessary permits stem partly from threats made by rebel commanders after several harsh anti-piracy operations by naval forces of certain countries. These commanders promised to kill citizens of those countries on sight, rather than taking them hostage for ransom. The moment you step outside the airport building, it becomes immediately clear that you are not just in an unstable but a highly dangerous country. Armed individuals are everywhere, an overwhelming sight even by African standards. Hotels that cater to the few daring tourists are equipped with special security features. For example, access to the gates involves navigating a long serpentine path made of thick concrete blocks, with 2 barriers placed within it. This setup prevents vehicles laden with explosives from speeding onto hotel grounds. Travel within the country must be done in tinted SUVs, accompanied by armed guards. While Somalia has many fascinating and colorful places to see, most of the time, you'll only be able to view them from behind car windows without stopping or stepping out. For terrorists affiliated with Al-Shabaab, Europeans and Americans are considered high-value targets. Killing such tourists is akin to taking out hundreds of Somalis in their eyes. If they have the chance, they won't hesitate to seize it. At least, this was the assertion of Somali officials not long ago. 6. Wages and prices. Paradoxically, in a country ravaged by years of war, salaries by African standards are relatively decent. Those employed in government sectors earn about $400 a month, while private business owners earn more. The tax system is poorly developed, so people can earn as much as they can without much oversight. For many families, the main source of income comes from remittances sent from abroad. Many Somalis have relatives who emigrated, and these emigrants provide financial support to family members left behind. For instance, a family living in America might send money to siblings in Somalia, even if they are adults with their own income. Recently, things have improved, and the standard of living has risen slightly. Some plots are priced in the millions. The rapid price growth is shocking and feels surreal for Africa. However, considering that apartments in Angola's capital sell for $500,000, it no longer seems so paradoxical. 7. Youth and their life plans. Somali youth are drawn to the narcotic substance khat, a shrub whose leaves are used as a drug. Alcohol is banned, but khat is not. Over the past 5 years, many universities and colleges have opened in Somalia. Young people try to pursue higher education after finishing school. University tuition costs about $500 a year, and many students receive scholarships or financial support from their parents. Educated youth increasingly aspire to leave the country, believing that life in Europe will offer better opportunities. Young people see no prospects in Somalia. Many travelers to African countries observe that a large number of Africans dream of emigrating. One traveler who visited Mali, Congo, and Somalia shared their impression. If a ship were to arrive in these countries and someone on board announced, "Whoever wants to leave for abroad, come aboard," very few people would stay behind. This sentiment doesn't seem like an exaggeration. Africans have little faith in their countries. In the aftermath of World War II, many European nations rebuilt their cities and believed in their future. In Africa, people lack such resilience and hope, making the situation deeply disheartening. 8. Sex for food. One of the main reasons Somalis joined militant groups was the behavior of peacekeepers. Peacekeeping missions in Somalia have typically involved soldiers from impoverished countries. From the onset of the Civil War, the UN Security Council initiated peacekeeping operations such as ANUSM I and later ANUSM II. These missions were led by U.S. military forces, including Marines under Operation Restore Hope, which involved soldiers from 20 countries. However, numerous mistakes were made during these operations. Peacekeepers often used excessive force without understanding the local context or cultural nuances. Unsurprisingly, the local population perceived them not as peacekeepers but as occupiers. This led to the withdrawal of UN troops, allowing militants from the Union of Islamic Courts to take control of Mogadishu and the central and southern regions of the country. The UN Security Council has since refrained from sending further missions to Somalia. Since the late 2000s, the African Union has conducted a peacekeeping mission in Somalia, comprising Ugandan and Burundian soldiers, heavily funded by the West. Rape and sexual abuse of minors, failure to prevent the killing of civilians, corruption in the distribution of aid, and looting. This is a partial list of accusations leveled against peacekeepers by local residents. 9. Are Islamists the main problem today? One of the most significant security threats in Somalia is the Al-Shabaab group. The terrorists have become so deeply embedded within the government and population that it's challenging to distinguish one from the other. I have no doubt that Al-Shabaab militants have already taken root and infiltrated the Somali government. This creates serious security issues. France Presse quoted former Ministry of Internal Security spokesperson Abdiaziz Ali Ibrahim. According to him, members of the local government and even representatives of the international community occasionally hire Al-Shabaab militants to intimidate and assassinate political opponents. For instance, in January 2017, Al-Shabaab militants attacked the Daya Hotel in Mogadishu, where members of the country's parliament were present. The attack resulted in 28 deaths and around 50 injuries. The fact that the African Union peacekeeping mission, active since 2007, has not been able to completely eliminate Al-Shabaab, and the Somali armed forces remain ineffective after so many years, has led even educated Somalis, who do not support the terrorists, to suspect that all this chaos was the federal government's ultimate goal. Actively supported by Western nations, wrote a French publication. As a result, many Somalis are joining the militants. Often, members of the same family find themselves on opposite sides of the conflict, with some fighting for Somalia's armed forces and others in the ranks of the terrorists. Militants easily recruit potential fighters by promising something as simple as a mobile phone in exchange for loyal service. If these promises are not kept, recruits quickly switch sides to the government forces. 10. Mogadishu today and Somalia's prospects overall. The capital remains an unsafe place. There is a green zone where movement is somewhat safer, but even in hotels, guests are advised not to leave without security. The primary threat is not robbery but kidnapping for ransom. A stark contrast exists. Many Mogadishu residents have decent phones, and internet services work well, but all this occurs against a backdrop of destruction. There is hope that the war will eventually fade entirely. The intensity of fighting and the number of casualties today are incomparable to the 1990s and early 2000s. Over 75% of the infrastructure of what was once Greater Somalia has been destroyed in 10 years of active warfare. By conservative estimates, at least 1 million people have died, many more have been maimed, and 5 million have fled the country. However, rebuilding the nation will be a long and challenging process, with an uncertain final outcome. There is probably no person in the world who hasn't heard the word mafia. Yet, few truly know how it originated, how it is organized, how it operates, and how it interacts with other, sometimes the most ruthless criminal groups in the world. The word mafia likely comes from Arabic, meaning refuge. Over centuries of fighting foreign invaders, Arabs, Normans, French, and Spanish, the Sicilians established hidden resistance bases in their rugged mountains. Far from towns, roads, and the occupying army's soldiers, desperate and ruthless fighters, who of course did not call themselves mafiosi, found shelter. There, they could rest, bandage their wounds, and, sustained by a piece of goat cheese and stale wheat bread, prepare to kill and be killed. The customs of the time were brutal. As time passed, these poor shepherds built a structure that extended its tentacles across the entire island, from the humble homes of peasants to the palaces of Palermo. Sicilian gangs created a model that was later adopted by criminal organizations worldwide. They became a formidable force in Sicily during the 1800s, and their power and sophistication steadily grew. Cosa Nostra translates from Sicilian as our thing. This was the name of the first mafia, founded by family clans. It is known for its code of honor, the omerta, which demanded absolute loyalty. Informers faced torture and death, and their families were also punished. Even today, mafia members in Sicily are sometimes called upon to resolve business disputes and locate stolen goods, as their services are often seen as more effective than the slow-moving judicial system. However, many despise the mafia's extortion practices, known as protection rackets, where business owners are forced to pay for the protection of their enterprises.